Hey, I'm Blair Best. It's Monday here on The Story, and tonight, as Hurricane Erin churns in the Atlantic, our Environment Northwest team explains how hurricanes form and why we rarely worry about them here in the West. Plus, Oregon's sanctuary status, highlighted by the federal government, is now falling into the crosshairs of the Trump administration. Oregon's Attorney General now joining a multi-state lawsuit against the administration regarding funding for crime victims. Washington County's district attorney joins me live in just a few minutes to talk about how this could impact his office. It's our big story tonight.
So right now in Washington County, there isn't a direct service provider for folks who have experienced sexual violence.
Tonight, organizations across the state that support survivors of crime like domestic violence and sexual assault are bracing for major funding cuts, some even proactively pausing crisis services. Now, this comes after the Trump administration threatened cuts to the Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA. The fund dates back to the Ronald Reagan administration. He signed it into law in 1984, and it's funded by criminal fines, not tax dollars, and distributed through grants to programs that help survivors. That's programs like the Sexual Assault Resource Center in Washington County, which has been around since 1977, providing 24-hour response, as well as being there for about 200 people a year who show up to Washington County hospitals for forensic exams after an assault.
Oh, the VOCA funding is a significant portion of our direct service delivery budget. So that supported all of our crisis line activities, on-call advocates who would be there 24/7.
The Trump administration is threatening to cut these funds for sanctuary jurisdictions, which do not help with federal immigration enforcement. Oregon is one of those jurisdictions and has been since 1987, meaning state and local law enforcement are not allowed to assist in federal immigration enforcement. In our state alone, 146 victim service providers rely on this federal money and face a loss of about $15 million this year. Brandy's organization typically gets $187,000 from the VOCA fund, and she's been told to anticipate an 80% cut, which is why last week, Brandy put an emergency pause on all direct services, including 24/7 care. Now, it's worth noting, if she can't provide 24/7 care because of these cuts, her organization is in jeopardy of not qualifying for state funding. And without either state or federal funding, it's unclear if they would be able to continue their work.
I don't know if I have the words yet to describe it, but as a leader of this organization, I experienced several sleepless nights and very long, stressful days to ultimately come to this decision. Our staff have been understanding, but at the same time, I think we're all very deeply concerned about our community and the fact that survivors will not have a confidential advocate near them or with them as they go through one of the most traumatic experiences in their lives.
Today, Attorney General Dan Rayfield joined 21 attorneys general suing the Trump administration over withholding funding, over $1 billion for crime victims nationwide.
The federal administration is trying to use victims of crime as a political tool to carry out an incredibly unpopular political agenda, and they're doing it in an unprecedented way by requiring the state to sign terms and conditions that ignore judicial precedent and long-standing Oregon laws. The president is absolutely welcome to disagree with the state of Oregon on our policies and our laws, but holding funding hostage is not the way we resolve disagreements in the United States.
I find it selfish. I find it a way in which to manipulate the community.
Today, we also heard from the Clackamas County District Attorney, John Wentworth.
We're standing on the edge of a catastrophic failure of our duty to protect the most vulnerable people in our communities. victims of crime. A federally created funding crisis has landed on our doorstep, and if we don't act, the people we represent will pay the price. I'd like you to consider the plight of a mother who finally finds the courage to pack a bag, grab her children, and flee an abusive home in the middle of the night. Where will she go? VOCA funding is a lifeline that pays for crucial services for her and thousands of others.
Now, while this lawsuit plays out, AG Rayfield is asking the state legislature for roughly $3 million to help fill the gap.
We know that the federal government's chaos has only made it harder at the state level, and we have an obligation to ask the legislature to step in and backfill what's been cut. We realize it's an incredibly challenging time to be asking state lawmakers for funding.
Now, let's remember, at the end of the day, it's those who have suffered from some kind of crime that will feel this cut the most.
When survivors experience sexual assault, it is so important for their long-term healing journey and their long-term mental health to have someone with them who believes them and is alongside them through that journey, whenever they need it and however they need it. And that is part of what SARC offered our community. Not only right after an assault, but at any point during their healing. And this will be a missed opportunity.
Okay, joining me now live is Washington County District Attorney Kevin Barton. Mr. Barton, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with the basics here. How will these cuts impact your office?
Well, the cuts will be devastating, and they impact my office in really two ways. First, we'll lose some direct funds that we use to hire victim advocates who are social workers who help crime victims out throughout the court process. We'll lose about a quarter of our victim advocate positions. So that's 5 out of our 20 positions. And then second, and perhaps even more significantly, we'll lose the ability to work with nonprofits like SARC that we just heard from, and other nonprofits that rely on these funds who do so much good work to make sure that victims have the support that they deserve and that they need when they're going through that initial process of reporting a crime. And that means when a victim goes to a hospital, for example, a rape victim, to get a sexual assault or rape kit exam, having someone there with her. When a victim has a child, a mother has a child who's been a child abuse victim, having someone that child can go to and tell to a professional what happened to them so we can prosecute that case. So really important aspects of these nonprofit partners that we work alongside.
So Clackamas County District Attorney John Wentworth today said that when victim services are cut, there is more crime and cases fall apart when victims are unable to testify or take part in the process. How do you see this impacting future cases in Washington County?
It's really just tragic because on one hand, we'll be unable to support crime victims at the level that they deserve to be supported at. On the second hand, we won't be able to hold offenders accountable at the level that we want to hold them accountable at because we know that crime victims will be lost in the shuffle. They won't have the support they need to navigate what can be a very difficult and traumatic court process. And if we can't prosecute the offenders who put them there in the first place, we know that many of these offenders will offend again and again and again. We see this time and time again with domestic violence cases, with sexual assault cases, with other crimes of violence. And so we're very worried about what this might mean from a crime rate perspective and a public safety perspective.
I mean, what do you make of the Trump administration holding these funds, as the Attorney General called it, holding them hostage to get the state to comply with his immigration policies? I mean, these aren't taxpayer dollars we're talking about. This is funded by criminal fines.
Right. You know, the VOCA fine dollar amounts, the VOCA fund has been around for over 40 years now, and it's been a very stable source of funding when it comes to not asking the taxpayers to pay for these amounts. It doesn't make sense to me that we're now in a position where these funds are tied to a broader national issue. At the end of the day, prosecutors like myself and victim advocates across Oregon, all we want to be able to do is to help crime victims out in their time of need and to prosecute and hold accountable those who put them in that bad situation. And now we find ourselves in a really precarious and difficult situation.
What is your message to survivors in Washington County who may be watching this tonight?
my message is we will do all that we can to support you throughout this process. And while it does feel like we have one hand tied behind our back now with the loss of funding, we've got two hands, and we're going to still go forward and do everything we can to make sure that victims have a safe place to report a crime, and that most importantly, that we can hold people accountable when they choose to harm someone else.
Okay, Mr. Barton, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Blair.
So talk to us. What's going through your mind? Do you agree with this type of money being withheld because of Oregon's sanctuary status? Why or why not? Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave us a voicemail. 503-226-5090. Well, the battle over federal funding and sanctuary jurisdictions goes far beyond the Victims of Crime Act that we just talked about. This is a letter here that a U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi sent to Governor Tina Kotek on Wednesday, basically a warning shot that the federal government is aware of Oregon's sanctuary status. The DOJ is threatening investigations, civil or criminal actions, and leveraging things like federal contracts and, of course, federal funds if the state doesn't make efforts to help federal immigration enforcement. The AG writing, "You are hereby notified that your jurisdiction has been identified as one that engages in sanctuary policies and practices that thwart federal immigration enforcement to the detriment of the interests of the United States. This ends now." And she gives a deadline of tomorrow for Governor Kotek to respond. The last we heard from the governor's office this morning was that they are reviewing the AG's letter, but argued that Oregon sanctuary law does not obstruct federal immigration efforts. The governor releasing a statement that reads, "I will fight for the safety and prosperity of every Oregonian, from recent immigrants to people who have been here for generations. Threats like this undermine our values and our right to govern ourselves. We will not be bullied into doing the federal government's job of immigration enforcement." Now, of course, Oregon is not alone. Washington Governor Bob Ferguson received a letter from Bondi as well over the Evergreen State's sanctuary status. Washington AG Nick Brown says the DOJ has no legal standing and calls the letter a threat.
Don't take those threats lightly. I mean, to have the Attorney General of the United States making threats against local officials is absurd and should be noteworthy for everyone that's paying attention.
Governor Ferguson posting on social media today that he will respond to Bondi tomorrow, but that, quote, "Washington has no intention of changing our values in the face of threats from the Trump administration."
Mail-in ballots are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots.
Okay, policies of the Northwest are under fire tonight as President Trump also takes aim at mail-in voting, vowing to end the practice via an executive order. Oregon was the first state in the country to implement a complete at-home vote-by-mail system, and several others have followed, including the state of Washington. The president claims the practice is more expensive and slower to get results compared to filling out a paper ballot at a polling place. Today, Oregon Secretary of State Tobias Reed, who is in charge of the state's elections, fired back.
He's wrong. Voting by mail in Oregon, which is, by the way, done with paper ballots, is less expensive than votes that require someone to show up at a specific place at a specific time. We follow the Constitution in Oregon, which says clearly that states run elections, not the federal government.
Now, I asked Oregon AG Dan Rayfield about this today, and he said Oregon's last Republican Secretary of State, Dennis Richardson, defended the security and integrity of mail-in voting during President Trump's first term.
The one thing about mail-in voting here in this state is we have always been a leader in terms of access for voters. If you look at the history of our Secretary of States that have served, even Republican Dennis Richardson talked about the values about mail-in voting. This is a new political avenue that is strange to be taking right now, especially when it's been proven to increase access, as well as Oregon having some of the most stable and effective elections in the country.
Democrats representing Oregon and Washington in Congress had something to say about it, too. Senator Maria Cantwell chiming in, "We can't be for suppressing the vote. Vote by mail is the consistently most safe and trackable method of voting." Senator Ron Wyden a bit more forceful, saying now Donald Trump is taking advice from Vladimir Putin on how to conduct elections. How about Trump ask voters here in Oregon and other states with vote by mail how it's long been proven as a secure, effective, and easy way for Americans to vote from home? Well, coming up next on the story, no doubt you've seen or heard about Hurricane Erin and its expected impacts this week on the East Coast. Our Environment Northwest team explains the science behind why we don't often worry about those massive storms here in the West, with one key difference between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. That's next, when the story returns. The first Atlantic hurricane of the year is churning in the Caribbean tonight with winds of 130 miles per hour. Hurricane Erin is not expected to make U.S. landfall, but will bring tropical storm force winds, dangerous waves, and rip currents to parts of the East Coast. Meteorologists are predicting more Atlantic storms than normal this hurricane season, but it's something that we rarely worry about here in the Northwest. So why is that? Meteorologist Leah Pizzetti from our Environment Northwest team looks at the driving factors that create hurricanes and the key difference between the coasts.
There are a few key elements that need to happen for a hurricane to form. One of the most important is warm ocean water. Ocean temperatures need to be at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit for a hurricane to form. The East Coast warm waters are key in that formation. Atlantic temperatures can warm all the way up to low 90s for parts of Florida, ideal fuel for hurricanes. The Pacific Ocean is a little different. United States West Coast waters are simply too cold. Even by the end of the summer, when temperatures are warmest, Southern California ocean temperatures peak between 68 to 72 degrees. Northern California ocean temperatures only get to about 55 to 70 degrees. That's why Eastern Pacific hurricanes solely form from Mexico into Central America. Water temperatures off central Mexico's coast can hit the 80s as early as May and June, hitting their peak temperature in August, September, and October. The Atlantic hurricane season starts June 1st, peaks September 10th, then officially ends November 30th. The Eastern Pacific hurricane season starts a little earlier, running from May 15th to November 30th. But the first named storm typically doesn't form until mid-June, and tropical cyclones can still happen outside of these dates. This map shows the tracks of early September hurricanes. You can see the Pacific storms start far south and jet to the west and northwest, dying off around U.S. waters. The Atlantic storms move the opposite direction, generally jetting off to the northeast. These patterns are thanks to trade winds. Pacific trade winds between the equator and latitude 30 degrees north pull storms in that westerly direction. And in the Atlantic, that pulls the storms from the coast of Africa toward the United States, then eventually ricocheting to the northeast at those higher latitudes.
Well, turning now to the state of Idaho, which has the worst ratio of doctors per capita in the entire country. The Association of American Medical Colleges says the Gem State is just above American Samoa, the territory in the South Pacific, when it comes to direct patient care physicians. That's not great. Back in 2022, when Idaho's near total abortion ban was triggered by the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, researchers began looking into the number of OB-GYNs in Idaho. Preliminary numbers after the first year were not pretty, but now we have results from the 2-year study, peer-reviewed and published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. As Brian Holmes reports, the OB-GYN situation in Idaho is worse than expected.
We had 268 doctors in the original cohort, and we lost 60 the first year, gained back 2. Then we lost 54, gained back 18. So a net loss of 94 or a total loss of 114 out of that first cohort. So it's about 43% of the total cohort, or about 33% of doctors net, I have left to say.
Based on what we talked about a year ago, I mean, does that shock you?
Yeah, I mean, it's, when Dr. Roman and I started this study, we didn't really have a hypothesis about what we would see. We actually thought something would change. And when we did the study, we thought we would probably see the end of it by the end of the first year. The end of the second year showed almost the same amount of doctors leaving. So it did surprise me, yeah.
For Dr. Roman,
we can bring 20 people in.
What shouldn't be a surprise is the impact is more than mathematical.
So when you lose people, 114 people out of 268, you can bring in 20 people, but that structure cannot be rebuilt in a very short time. In fact, it takes decades, and it takes cultivation of relationships where there's trust, and that takes time. I think that's one of the points, Brian, that I think is important for people to understand, is that underneath that, there's a story of our connections with each other and the stability of our communities.
The big question that I asked last time that you said you weren't looking into and wasn't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if it was part of this study or not, was the why.
It's a really great question, and it's one we need to be very accurate about understanding, because I don't think there's any one reason why that's there.
However, the study did show of the 55 OB-GYNs who stopped practicing in Idaho in 2024, nearly half took their expertise to another state, all with less restrictive abortion laws than Idaho. And McEachern and Roman's work focused on doctors' well-being,
Ed and I do a lot of work around that,
has shown them some signs.
The level of distress among physicians who are trying to deal with laws that have changed dramatically, many of which are ambiguous.
Under this new section, those performing criminal abortion will be charged with a felony punishable by no less than 2 years and no more than 5 years in prison.
And trying to figure out how they care for their patients, being told that at times they're not going to be able to do what they know will help them, is causing tremendous distress.
Still, McEachern
I don't think there's a one
doesn't want to speculate.
We spent a long time trying to make sure that this data was valid and it's accurate and it's reliable. And I don't want to give answers to a why that's sort of a shoot from your hip question, because it's a very, very important question. And it matters in that it might point back to how we make things better.
I think that's such an important point, is that this study has been brought forward so that there will be conversation. This is not about placing blame. It's not about making someone right or wrong. It's like, this is what we're facing, guys. What do you think we can do? What are some creative ways we can move forward together?
So the ideal number of OB-GYNs in Idaho, according to those doctors who performed the study, is around 300. There's less than 180 right now. The study also looked at the availability of OB-GYNs. There are 44 counties in the state, and 85% of the doctors practice in just 7 of them, leaving about 2 dozen to cover the remaining 37 counties. We're back right after this. Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. Straight Talk is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. Have a great Monday night. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.